The Festival of the Greasy Pole by René Depestre. As always, I have to make my disclaimer about accent, but we can't be stopped from reading wonderful books because we can't always pronounce things the way they ought to be. This is a Haitian novel written under the Duvalier dictatorship, and there is a disclaimer at the beginning, which I will read, which is completely not true. It is about the Duvalier, the times of Duvalier. It's a very good book. I will just read a little for you. The Festival of the Greasy Pole, says René Depestre, is not a historical chronicle, a roman éclair, or a work of autobiographical origin. The great Zacharian nation referred to is, to all appearances, an imaginary country that resembles the land of Cacaïn, but in a crazier version. The events and the characters of the narrative therefore belong to the realm of pure fiction. Any resemblance to persons, animals, trees, living or having lived, any similarity, close or distant, to names, situations, places, systems, cogwheels of steel or fire, or to any other scandal in real life, can only have the effect, therefore, of coincidence, that is, not only accidental, but downright scandalous. The author firmly declines that responsibility that some spirits, shining with precision and tenderness, have called the inalienable rights of the imagination. There was once a man of action who was forced by the state to manage a small business on the north edge of a tropical city. This man's name was Henri Postel. The shop, designated by the authorities as Noah's Ark, was under the administration of the National Office for the Electrification of Souls, NOFES. After hearing a report from the minister of NOFES one October afternoon, the great electrifier of souls had said to him, "Your report, my dear Clovis, was quite remarkable. There is just one point on which I don't agree, the fate of ex-Senator Henri Postel. We must proceed in his case with greater skill than in those of petty conspirators. Our man is still influential. Drowning him in tonight's bloodbath means giving him a martyr's palms at cut rate. He will still be able to organize plots from his grave. It's better to put together the most natural death possible for him." "Isn't that what our poisons are for, Excellency?" Clovis Barboteau had answered. "That solution doesn't appeal to me in Postel's case. Remote control suicide? That either. A final ride in a helicopter? No, my dear Clo, none of the usual methods. An adversary of his importance deserves an exceptional end. I'm thinking about a death that will slowly nibble away at his spirit before attacking his body. Let's make him into a zombie for the rest of his days." "That's incredible. Our gray matter is working in unison. Just imagine. For 2 days I've been concocting something close to that. I've definitely put aside last century's procedures for zombifications. Too many risks? Yes. Besides, they don't fit in with our electronic times. They smack of Emperor Faustin, eh? Since our Faustin's Soloque, the world has made progress in these matters. I want to see Postel move freely in human society, with his memories, feelings, ideas, tastes, and dislikes. He won't have either a dazed appearance or the glassy stare of our traditional living dead. He must remain conscious of his state to the very end. That's an eraser for rubbing out the man starting with his own conscience. Pure genius, isn't it? With my system, the zombification factor will be lodged inside Postel. Death will rise from his unconscious like a neurosis, misleading him at every moment. He will think the road leading straight to the grave is a reprieve. Electrification of souls attains a new metaphysical dimension, a death resembling life more than anything else. Auto-zombification. Exactly, dear fellow. Listen to the funniest part of the story now. Postel himself provided the point of departure for my quest. He was in his first year of law when I was an intern at the School of Medicine. We were pals. His head was full of subversive ideas even then. One evening he confided to me that, for him, the greatest misfortune would not be to lose both legs, or to be locked up in secret confinement for 30 consecutive years in Fort Sanzy. Do you know what the greatest distress was in the eyes of student Postel? To be condemned to sell groceries or small hardware to beleaguered customers in our poor neighborhoods. I can't see myself, said my former university friend, being forced to distribute cornmeal or lard from morning to evening. Some modern Caligula would find that the most infallible way to destroy me bit by bit without having to shed a drop of my blood. So, my dear Claude, dig up the most run-down shop in the Lagorangat area or in Tête-Boeuf and stick Henri in the place of its owner. With your usual skill, take care that nothing living or warm remain at his side. No women, children, relatives, friends, supporters, not even a pet. Several hours after this conversation, the chief of Nofes executed to perfection the plan they had set. He arrived in front of Henri Postel's house, accompanied by 3 trucks teeming with soldiers. That night in Turgeau, people cringed with fear in their beds as they heard the shrieks of women, children, parrots, dogs, and cats, generously punctuated with machine-gun bursts. The next day, Port-le-Roi learned that the Postel family, like thousands of Postelian militants, had been neutralized. It was also announced that the head of the movement had, in extremis, pleaded with the great electrifier of souls to allow him to run a shop peacefully under the sign of Noah's Ark. The Nofes communique noted that His Excellency the President for Life, the Honorable Zucrates Zachari, had immediately acquiesced to the request of his last living enemy, giving proof to the great Zacharian nation once again of his magnanimity toward the vanquished. For ages, Henri Postel had been up by dawn and at his counter, smeared with pork fat and fly cadavers. He had sold nails, sugar, asafoetida, salted butter, spices, cigarettes, salt herring, string, rapadura, kerosene, Palma Christi oil, candles, and dozens of other small items in current demand. The man had arrived in Tête-Boeuf with the physique of an athlete. Now he had thickened in an ugly way at the neck, in the shoulders, at the paunch, and on his behind. The back of his neck, the lower part of his face, and his hands were dramatically marked with wrinkles. Everything about him seemed to be in decline, except his arms, which were still strong, and his eyes, which occasionally seemed less aged than the rest of his features. In Tête-Boeuf, everyone could offer some observation showing to what degree the ex-senator was going downhill in the electro-commercial circuits of Nofes. Those who loved Postel and who had tried to help him finally stopped making their little purchases at Noah's Ark, for each time they went in, they left with tears in their eyes. The time came when Barbatog had to disguise agents of his ministry as customers to keep the normally deserted store in business. From that time on, the admirers and enemies of Postel assumed that the end had begun. Henri's closest neighbor was a shoemaker by the name of Horace Vermont. Recently, the 2 men had been in the habit of talking to each other late in the evening. Vermont had his own legend in the neighborhood. People said that he was quite educated, and that, before he sank to repairing worn-out shoes, he had been the principal of a provincial lycée. He was often seen with a book in his hand, and everyone spoke to him familiarly as Master Horace. When anyone talked about some new detail of Postel's decline, Master Horace, whose kindness and easygoing nature were as notorious as his taste for reading, suddenly lost his composure. The sons of bitches will never understand a thing about the human heart's capacity for resistance. When someone finally asked him at once about the basis of his confidence in Postel, He gave explanations that simply perplexed his listeners further. "During all the time I've been talking to him," he said, "I haven't learned a thing about his life that everyone doesn't already know. It doesn't make any difference that he is always going from one taffia to another. He knows how to hold his tongue. He is more close-mouthed about his plans than an empty tomb. In his place, which one of you wouldn't be the same way? You ask where my faith in him comes from? Observing him from my cobbler's corner, I have an idea that, in spite of his paunch, wrinkles, bloodshot eyes, sleepy look, that this man, in the depths of his drunken stupor, is putting something together that no one in this town will be able to steal from him. What could it be? Truthfully, I do not know. Perhaps Henri himself doesn't yet know what his own mind is hatching." One Wednesday evening, several days after this conversation, Master Horace, who was struggling with a shoe top, saw Postel come into the shop. "Master Horace," he said. "What is it, Chief? Have you got a minute?" "As many as you want. You closed early today." "Yes." "What's going on?" "It's this. I'm getting out of here. You've seen my customers, right? Legitimate buyers are pretty scarce. They're right to avoid my shop. For 5 years they've been watching a Noah who wallows around in grease and taffia instead of a real helmsman. This is the final curtain of that repulsive spectacle, Master Horace. I'm leaving for good." "Oh, don't say that, Chief. Anyone can talk like that except you. If you go off into exile, it will be to take up the battle there." "I owe you the truth. I'm going away with no expectation of coming back." "You came back the other time. You see where that got me." "Your fight in the Senate did some good." "What did I do during those 2 years? Preached into the wind. During that time, Zachary, for his part, electrified, zombified, murdered at every turn. Who am I now? Only last Sunday I was telling people who sympathize with you that you are concocting something that no one in this city will be able to steal from you. That's right. Not a soul can steal my departure. I was thinking about an act that would have raised you back up in the esteem of your friends. I shut the mouth of a tailor who yelled, 'Look at this country. Has it got any pastel service?' If your tailor meant that you can't expect anything from one lone man, then he's right. This country is definitely and relentlessly without a pastel cure. They've fabricated a collective history for us called the electrification of souls. I've gotten nowhere hurling soap bubbles at it. I wouldn't want to be indiscreet, Chief, but one point. Please go ahead. Under their present surveillance, how can you leave the country? Our enemies are not that strong or clever. I am going to walk off right under their noses, and I even have a little souvenir to leave them as a farewell." At these words, Master Horace straightened up suddenly. His tired, uneasy glance livened up with frankness and hope. "I knew," he said, "that you weren't going to take off like that. Maybe the arms of a nice old shoemaker at your side. Thanks for your help, but for what I have to do, my hands will be enough. I can still hold a cutlass. Oh, don't worry. I'm not going to gun down Barbatog or Angèle Zachary. I spread my nets lower than that. You'll hear about it tomorrow. There is one favor that you can do for me, however. At dawn, when I am already far away, put the following sign on the door of Noah's Ark: Closed for dezombification." "Now," said Postel, "I have to get along. Farewell, old brother." He hugged the shoemaker and, without looking at him, left the shop. He was slightly stooped, and he staggered as he walked out into an evening that could not soften the city. Now, this goes on for a long, long time, and I think I'm probably out of time, so I'm going to stop. But do not worry, because Postel does something very cool, and it is not surprisingly related to the somewhat bizarrely named, but it will make sense when you read the book, Festival of the Greasy Pole. I love that book. All right,